Good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to you all to the 2021 Cadbury Lectures at the University of Birmingham in the School of Philosophy, Theology and Religion. My name is Charlotte Hempel, and I'm the head of the School of Philosophy, Theology and Religion. And we are offering a very warm welcome to our regular, more local Cadbury Lecture audience who would normally be with us in person, as well as to the rest of the world. It's great to see so many of you with us tonight. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Linda Woodhead from the University of Lancaster, where she is Distinguished Professor of Religion and Society, to speak to us 4 evenings this week. It's very appropriate that a professor from Lancaster is speaking in Birmingham on religion, because the Department of Religious Studies was established at the University of Lancaster in 1967 by Professor Ninian Smart, who moved to Lancaster from Birmingham. And the topic of Professor Woodhead's lectures, Values Are the New Religion, is also very appropriate for the Edward Cadbury lectures, because to the Cadbury family of chocolate fame, both religion and values were extremely important. And we have a real treat in view tonight, because Professor Woodhead has worked for many years on religion and society, and more recently on non-religion. And she's going to speak with us this evening about personal values. Professor Woodhead, over to you.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you for the invitation to give these lectures. It's a huge honour. Thank you for everyone who's come. It's very sad, of course, not to be in Birmingham in person, but the positive of that is that more of you, I think, can attend. So that's great. This topic of religion, values as the new religion, is one that is very close to my heart, and it's a fantastic forum to share it. And it's close to my heart. I was thinking on why I'm so fascinated in this. I think it's partly because, to be a little bit personal myself, I was brought up in Somerset in the southwest of England, and I transitioned from different schools rather quickly. I went to a Church of England primary school, and then a very old-fashioned Catholic convent school very briefly, and then a very secular comprehensive school. And I also live very near Glastonbury with all the alternative culture going on there. So I was tipped in and out of these very, very different sets of values. And I think it's always made me fascinated by how strongly people are motivated by very different things, and in the change in overall values. So let me share my screen and my PowerPoint. Here we are. There are 4 lectures in this series, and this first one, as Charlotta said, is going to be on personal values. And part of what I want to explore with you is this, what I'm going to call the new values visibility. It's the way that values are just everywhere around. Here's a random primary school, and the symbol, the flag, the rainbow pride flag, has become, it's a value symbol. It symbolizes certain values. It's rivaling other symbols and even national flags as something that people rally around. In terms of personal values, the younger you are, whatever generation you belong to, the more likely you are to be able to say something very clear and articulate about what your personal values are. I'm old enough to find that still quite difficult. Well, it's a bit easier now. I've been thinking about values, but for younger people, for my students, that's something that they have thought about and can articulate. And there are plenty of ways in which that has come about. And there are digital tools like this. Start your test, so you can discover your core values. It's not just a matter of choosing, it's a matter of discovering. You can see the values there. We're just on the C's: courage, curiosity, and creativity. I mean, I'm going to talk more about what the values are that we are so visible now. And it's interesting you know, in terms of categories, they rather blur categories. They're not, some are virtues, some are ethical values, and some are goods. Values just means values are inherently relational. It's something is valuable because someone or many people value it. And here are things that people might value. This is the very broad sense that values has. In the lecture tomorrow, I'm going to talk more about organisational values and also about school values, which of course schools are another place where we're socialised into values, very, very self-consciously now, in the UK at least. These sorts of pictures of a school's values around classrooms and corridors are very, very common. And I'm going to be talking about the values that are most commonly seen in schools. Here you can see a little selection. I won't tell you what the top one is. You have to wait till tomorrow to find out what the number one is, value in schools is. That will connect us to the topic of British values, which is something that's of course promoted, backed, required in schools by the government, and why that happened. If you don't know your 5 fundamental British values, that's what they are. Highly controversial, of course. And I'm going to talk about corporate values, the values that organisations now increasingly have to have. Value statements are becoming de rigueur. Here's, just picked off the web, an icon set where you can pick your icons to make your value statement look prettier. Again, fascinating what the values are. And then in the third lecture, I'm going to talk about broader economic and political values. I'm going to mainly in these lectures, because I've done most of my empirical research in the USA and the UK, I will mainly be talking about those places with just a sideways glance to other places. And I'm also going to be looking at how political values connect in with our lives and our wider collective values and what holds us together. And I'm going to end on Friday. I think there's a gap on Thursday, no lecture on Thursday. The fourth and final lecture on Friday will be about value wars. I think culture wars are really values wars. And of course, the more visible values become and the more articulate we all are, and given there's so much choice and plurality, the possibility of clash and conflict and tension between different values grows. And we're seeing that all over the place in all sorts of values, tensions and clashes and arguments at the moment. I will also, throughout, I will offer some more evaluative reflections on what I think is going right and going wrong here. Many of you will probably be thinking, is this just all window dressing? What's going on here? Is there any depth to it? And I want to think about that. I've thought about that a lot in the course of researching and writing these lectures, and so I would like to talk about that with you as well in the conversation. I will talk for 45 minutes, and then we'll have 45 minutes for Q&A. So please do post any questions and comments, and I'm looking forward to that. So let's get on with this first topic, which is personal values. And as my overall title, Values of the New Religion, suggests, I want to look at how values have taken over from religion. That's my argument anyway. I think that religion, these things are in an inverse relationship, and that part of the reason for religious decline, Christian decline particularly, has to do with changing values, and changing values take some of the functions away from religion as well. But I also want to look at what sort of an ethic we're talking about here, and how our personal ethic has changed. I'm going to argue that there's now a majority ethic, which is, or a default ethic, the one you don't really have to question, the one it's just all around, and that default ethic that a majority accept has changed, and that it's changed in the course of my lifetime, and that it's a very profound change because a Christian ethic has given way to a new ethic. And my shorthand for this is that we've moved from a give your life ethic and set of values to a live your life ethic and set of values, and I'll be explaining that. Now, let me start by talking about moral fall, and part of the reason for rejection of Christianity as a moral of the churches and the clergy as moral guardians. My point is that the higher you put yourself up a moral pedestal, the greater you have to fall down. There is a wonderful illustration of that in Ireland, and in Derek Scally's book about Ireland, The Best Catholics in the World. The Irish, the Church, and the End of a Special Relationship is its subtitle. And Scally was born and brought up in Ireland. He now lives in East Germany, and he actually makes comparisons between Ireland and East Germany that are extremely interesting. But he documents very powerfully the unbelievably profound and swift change from a deeply Catholic Ireland, the best Catholics in the world, to a very post-Christian Ireland or post-Catholic Ireland today. He has a lot of interviews throughout the book, and here was something that struck me in his interview with Sean Brady, who was a very prominent cardinal who's been much criticised for not dealing with abuse and abusers effectively. And Sean Brady tells him about why he chose to go into a seminary and be a Catholic priest, and he was persuaded, he was told, that the priest combines the highest callings of the doctor and the lawyer. The priest teaches the most important truths in this life. He pleads at the highest court, and he heals the greatest ills. And that exalted place, including a moral place for the clergy, really comes through. And then there's this very poignant interview with Sister Mary Reynolds, who is senior in the Sisters of Mercy, which is one of the orders that is very, very much criticised for terrible abuses in the exercise of care. And she says, because we had such a high reputation for the quality of what we were doing, we didn't see how care was being exercised. An understatement. So, moral gloss can lead to certain blindness too. Well, Scally has a chapter, a whole section actually called Implosion, where the whole thing comes crashing down like a house of cards. The whole Catholic edifice, which is very much tied up with the state and state services, it all comes down. And of course, the issue that brings it down is the scandal of sexual abuse. And it's the scandal, not just of the actual abusers, but of the senior clerics who failed to deal with it. This is a very iconic picture of Brendan Smythe, a terrible serial abuser who was shifted around not just Ireland, but different countries in the world. He was thrown out of all of them for being a paedophile and kept returning to Ireland, the one place he wasn't thrown out of until he was finally charged and arrested. So that implosion has been dramatic, and the reports, the terrible stories, and very poignant picture here, the apologies to survivors, have completely shifted the values in Ireland, and of course the value of religion. Well, that's a very dramatic example, of course, and it's a Catholic example. But let's think about Protestant Christianity and its loss of moral authority. What I think of when I think about this is that there were equivalent, moral claims to moral guardianship, to being moral entrepreneurs, really intense campaigns. The title of moral rearmament is so telling, especially given that when it's founded, and that it's thinking about war, it's thinking about rearming in the eve of the Second World War. But this is a moral rearmament. That language, that imagery tells you a lot. And moral rearmament was a movement of Protestant Christians starting in Oxford, and and became a global movement. Here it's four absolutes: absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. The plan was to, change the world through rearming people with these absolute moral truths. It led to things like the nationwide Festival of Light in 1971, where moral rearmament bands from around the country all came to England, and here you can see them holding their banners: Essex and Newcastle and Taunton. And here are some of the people involved. On the left, Cliff Richard, a very young Cliff Richard, Malcolm Muggeridge, and Mary Whitehouse. I don't know who the guy giving the award is. If anyone knows, let me know. Well, these moral crusades painted a picture of a country that was in complete moral decline, that values were just going to disappear because of the decline of Christian values. So if people didn't rearm with Christian values, there was going to be nothing left. I mean, it would be a value-free society. It would collapse into a sort of moral anarchy. That led, very importantly, to a reaction. The Gay Liberation Front was founded in Britain in direct response to that, and they took direct action at the nationwide Festival of Light and tried to disrupt it. So that particular kind of sort of fundamentalist Christian moral crusade provoked a very strong reaction, and provoked, I suppose, a moral, real sort of Hegelian moral clash, out of which came something new. However, I've been talking there about two very particular kinds of very absolutist Christian morality, and very dualistic. We have the moral truth and no one else has it. Of course, that wasn't every kind of Christian ethic. It didn't probably speak to most Christians, who adopted a more gentle, liberal kind of Christian ethic. And there were people writing and being widely read in the 60s and 70s who were pretty horrified by the more, by the moral rearmament types of movement, and who proposed different, much softer, more liberal ethics. Joseph Fletcher in the States wrote his book Situation Ethics, The New Morality, which is really about, just love, that's all you need, and work it out in every situation what's going to be the best outcome for the most people. It was a sort of love utilitarianism. And that was picked up in Honest to God by John Robinson. My old tutor when I was a student, Don Cupid, was also being very, very prescient right back in the early 70s. He wrote books like Crisis of Moral Authority in 1972. And he had his finger on all sorts of issues, like Christian attitudes to women, and like the asceticism, the self-denial, the harshness in the Christian ethic. And he argued that Jesus did not ever talk about seeking pain. He didn't think that picking up the cross was what Christians were commanded to do. So these alternative voices. And then there were the sort of general progressivist liberal ethic. People like Hans Kung in Germany, who propose a global ethic, that everyone around the world can unite in a sort of progressive, humanistic, universalist ethic where we're all brothers and sisters of one another, and we should all be respectful and tolerant and have basic universal ethical values, and that'll make the world a better place. There's been a lasting influence of that kind of liberal Christian ethic. I think you can see it even in things like well, certainly progressivism in the United States, and in the perhaps in some of the Remain in the EU Brexit campaign values as well. I'll come back to that, of how I think a Christian liberal ethic has gone into a sort of secular progressive ethic. That's not in this lecture. That's the political one. So I think what we're left with in the UK, and well, perhaps Ireland as well, and perhaps many other liberal democratic Christian heritage countries, there's a kind of ambivalence about Christian ethics on the part of people whose families were Christian in the past. So on the one hand, an increasingly non-religious population often, especially rhetorically, sees religion as the symbol of all repression. You know, religion is everything that's about not being who you are, and Mary Whitehouse, and you know, sexual coldness and harshness. And then, interestingly, the Pride rainbow becomes the symbol of the opposite. It's about finding who you are, coming out, being liberated. Those two are seen as the opposites. The churches are seen as preachy, out of touch, you know, moralistic. But on the other hand, if you ask people whether they describe themselves as Christian, a lot of people, I've done this often in interviews, a lot of people say, well, I'd like to think so. And what they mean is, there are values in Christianity that I still think are worth keeping, that I'd like to live by. And people also differentiate between, they often say something like, well, I might be Christian in my own way, I don't like the church, or I don't like the institution of the church, but there's a core teaching there. Some people run off with it and do bad things, but I think there's a really good core to it. People say things like that. So I think a lot of people simultaneously hold these thoughts together, and they can shift from one, you know, all religion's terrible, to actually we're still a Christian country and that's a good thing kind of thinking. Well, but yeah, that's the ambivalence. But there is a widespread feeling that it is now absolutely clear that you can be good without religion. That the moral rearmament view that if Christianity and the churches decline, then we'd all be impossible for us to be moral. People just don't believe that anymore. And the moral collapse of the Catholic Church and so on has helped spread that view. And that goes along with a shift of moral responsibility to each individual. I've argued for a long time that this is one of the reasons why full secularization in the sense of church and Christian decline in this country and the United States and other European countries. Here's a graph I've often shown of Anglicans on the left in blue, and you've got people's ages on the vertical axis. So if you're over 70, you're likely to be C of E in your self-description. But if you go down to the bottom, if you're under 20, only just over 10% will say that. And the majority of young people will say they have no religion. This is when they're asked on a survey. Do you have a religion? Christian, Buddhist, Hindu? None, and so on. So why has this happened? I think that part of the argument, much more than science, is values. That the values that the churches stood for ceased to be compelling values. In some cases, they became anti-values for many people. So there was a moral disaffection. And we feel increasingly in this country, that in Britain, that it's up to us. It's up to us to choose and make decisions and take responsibility for how we live our own life. Liberalism with a small l, liberalism in that sense, that everyone should be free to choose how they live their own life, is absolutely widespread. So in this survey, I asked people, 2013, I asked people, which do you rely on most for guidance? Do you live your life and make decisions? And overwhelmingly, people said own reason and judgment, or own intuition and feelings. The next highest is family, that's only 18%. And a scripture or holy book, e.g. Bible, Quran, 2%, My religious or spiritual group, 1%. Religious leaders, local or national, 0. Now, of course, it's not that people might not consult the Quran or whatever it might be, but they will still feel that ultimately it's their responsibility. It's they who decide whether to take the advice or not. So this brings me to my heart of my argument, really, which is, I think, what we've moved. So what have we moved? I've said what we've moved from. What have we moved to? What's the post-Christian set of values? And for us as individuals personally, I think it's what this is my term, I borrowed it from Rihanna, the singer. I call it the live your life ethic. And each word in that counts. We think it's good to live, really live, go for it, as the Nike advert says. Your or my, it's unique to me. I can't live your life and you can't live my life. And there is an ethical responsibility to find out what my life is about and make the most of that, realize that potential. And live your life. Life itself is a value. Life is of value. Not suffering, not pain, not death, but life. My life, other people's life, ecological, planetary, biological life even. This is the live your life ethic. And it involves being who you're meant to be and doing what only you can do, because only you are you. Only you can do in this life. And it means respecting and supporting others who are doing the same thing. They're living their life and they need to be supported and respected in doing that. And of course, if they're on the same path as you, they share values, then you're more likely to feel a kinship with them and give special support to that group. I first became really clearly aware, I think, of this live your life ethic when I did a series of photos and interviews. I did this collaboration work with Liz Hingley, the photographer, the portrait photographer, and she asked people to bring a spiritual object, and then she took their portraits, beautiful portraits. She's a beautiful photographer, and I interviewed them about why they picked that object and what it meant to them. People picked fantastic things. For this lady, it was, I think it's a book about psychoanalysis. Learning was what really mattered to her in her life. For this gentleman, my object is my kesh, my uncut hair. It reminds me of the gratitude I owe my creator for my form. Just thanks to Liz Hingley, who took those beautiful photographs. And she'd started off in Texas, and then I joined her in Birmingham, Glasgow, London, and Manchester. And we invited people to come and have a free portrait and talk about their objects. Well, in the course of doing this, early on doing it, actually, I stumbled on a question that sounds like would never work, but actually it's a question that works really well when you ask people this. You always get a long silence if you ask them, what is the meaning of life? Long silence. Quite a few say 42 from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Is it 42? Anyway, you know what I mean. But then they say something really interesting and profound. And here's a tiny little selection. There were 100 plus. But let me read these to you in case you're not looking at the screen. Douglas, these are pseudonyms, says, I think it has to be about human connection and understanding and having compassion and leave things better than we found them. Aisha says, you have to follow your heart. Always be honest, respect other people, always be open-minded. And Kim says, I just want to do what I love. I want to achieve the best I can. And also friends. Probably love, work, and being a good person. Now, it took me a while to see there was this guiding thread in these comments, and it was the live your life ethic, as I'd now call it. Earlier in my career, between 2000 and 2002, I was involved with 4 colleagues from Lancaster in a project in the town of Kendal in the northwest of England, and it gave rise to this book, The Spiritual Revolution: Why Religion is Giving Way to Spirituality, that I wrote with my colleague Paul Helas. And I did a lot of interviews with Karen Tusting in the congregations, in the churches in Kendal. And the congregation, the people we spoke to, like the congregations, were most likely to be older, and they were most likely to be women. And there were some stock phrases that they had and that they used and that we heard in church after church. And they were, here are three of them: God first, neighbour second, self last. What's in the middle of sin? I. Have to think about that one. And joy, an acronym: Jesus first, others in the middle, you last. Now, that idea of you last is the old Christian ethic they were brought up with. It's not the live your life ethic. It's really not the live your life ethic, which has come, 360 degrees since that. We also did surveys of the congregations, the worshipping congregations in Kendal. These bars are the different churches, don't worry about that. The only thing you need to look at is the pink. So we asked the question, which comes closest to your beliefs? You should follow your heart, or you should think of others before yourself. Well, overwhelmingly, as you can see from the pink, over 90% say you should think of others before yourself. This is all of a piece with the Christian agape ethic. It was very powerfully articulated in the mid-20th century in a number of very, very influential theological books. A very serious theological reflection, academic theological reflection by Anders Nygren, who's a Swedish theologian. Agape and Eros came out originally in 1930, but in English, and it was very influential in English in 1953. And C.S. Lewis wrote a much more popular book, The Four Loves, that came out in 1960. Now, both Lewis and Nygren argued something very similar, which is that Christian love is selfless, it's self-sacrificial, and it's gift love. You give yourself away unselfishly. All other sorts of love, and that includes empathy, friendship, and erotic love, are lesser. They're selfish. They're about fulfilling a need and not pure gift. So the idea of love is of an asymmetric and self-giving relationship. And that's what you're hearing echoes of in those quotes from the churches. Now, I think that the Christian ethics isn't one thing, and it gets particular reinforcement at particular times. This view, of course, made huge sense in the 20th century with 2 world wars, in which what could have been seen and was by some as needless slaughter was dignified and understood by many as the supreme sacrifice. It was a lesser Calvary. It was an imitation of what Jesus Christ had done. And that is why it is memorialized with a crucifix. And that made it very hard to argue against this view of sacrifice as the highest value. It was very gendered. For women, it wasn't the supreme sacrifice. It was more daily, unpaid self-sacrifice, looking after the elderly, not getting married to look after dependent relatives, bringing up children, doing care work. This is Teresa of Lisieux, making little sacrifices every day. But the agape ethic was coming under fire in the second half of the 20th century, intellectually and in people's lives. Charity and pastoral care, undergirded by an agape ethic, were seen by many increasingly as paternalistic, condescending, even cruel. And you get that view even as far back as Charles Dickens talking about workhouses and so on. Women's work of benevolence, often unpaid, voluntary women's charitable work, was increasingly seen as amateur, unprofessional, or just, not unrewarded, not put on a proper footing, not valued. You also had feminism being highly critical of the view that you should give yourself for others, and saying that reinforced hierarchy and patriarchy. And in theology, Valerie Saving's article, The Human Situation, A Feminine View, she argued against the Christian view that pride is a great sin, and said, no, for women, a bit of pride would be a nice thing. Allow us, please, to have some self-respect. And then at the same time, of course, in the second part of the 20th century, you've got growing religious diversity as well as religious secular diversity. I want to share these quotations with you that come from an MA that I supervised a long time ago, 2003, by Mary Beetham, who interviewed Catholic women aged over 60 then. And this is an absolutely wonderful piece of work because it gives us a glimpse into how this shift happens from the agape ethic to the live your life ethic. And it doesn't happen in the course of someone's life. It happens between the generations. So this is what these are quotes by different women. This is what they say. You fulfilled your duty as a good Catholic girl, dutifully committing yourself to your family, as your mother did, sublimating your own desires for the needs of the greater good of everyone else, and you just got on with it. And then another says, it was the same for everyone, and you accepted it. Not that young girls, even my own daughter, would see it like that today. She'd laugh at the idea. They would say we were being duped. Maybe we were. And one more. It's easier to see with hindsight what happened. Today, women do what they believe is best for themselves and their families, as they should. They don't have all the guilt and conscience stuff. I envy them that. So Mary Beetham's work shows that these Catholics were still Catholic. They still held to their values, but they could completely understand why their daughters and granddaughters didn't. And they sort of admired them for having different values. That's where the change happens between the generations. Until the live your life your ethic becomes our sort of majority or default ethic everywhere in popular culture, from Frozen to what's on the bestseller list at the moment. And there, just to sum it up again, is what the live your life ethic consists on: discovering who you are, showing kindness and respect to yourself as well as others, finding your community, supporting each other, and leaving the world a better place than you found it. Now, is the live your life ethic good enough? Or is it selfish? Is it narcissistic? There is some awareness of its significance, not much writing on it, but those who do write about it tend to be critical. They say it is narcissistic, it is selfish. Stephen Tipton's book, Getting Saved from the 60s, he first talks about an expressive ethic and starts to get a grip on this, looking at the counterculture in the USA. And then that idea is taken up in Robert Bella's book, Habits of the Heart, that was influenced by Tipton. And he's very critical of the expressive ethic. He sees he sees it as therapeutic and just too much about me. And Charles Taylor also talks about the expressive ethic at length in books like Sources of the Self, and he understands it very well, but he also thinks it's not really robust enough to support civic virtue. There aren't many defenders. I think I would probably be a defender, but one very articulate defender is Hugh Rock, who is a Quaker theologian who wrote a wonderful book in 2014 called God Needs Salvation. And these are quotes from that book. And he says something very important here. All true individualism is demandingly reciprocal. All true individualism is demandingly reciprocal. If you think that you've got the freedom and ought to be able to live your own life, well, you have to extend that to everybody else as well, is his point. And he talks about the solidarity. The solidarity is that everyone should be free to fulfill their own lives in their own way. I think an issue where you can really sort of test this out, whether the new ethic is as able to support virtue as the old ethic, if you like, is in care work in society. There is a lot of understandable anxiety after the pandemic about what we've seen exposed about how undervalued care is in society, and books just out this year like this, The Care Crisis, talking about how undervalued care is and how much needs to change. And we know that the welfare state and the NHS in Britain were partly Christian projects. Archbishop William Temple coined the term the welfare state, and the NHS, the church donated its health enterprises to it. So we know that the Christian ethic undergirded care, and that many nurses and other people were trained and inspired to care by that Christian ethic of self-giving love. But what takes its place? Here's a lovely picture from Copenhagen in 1901 of the nurse, the nun, in her caring role. It's very gendered. It's also very raced, who does care work, I beg your pardon. Here's a holistic spirituality and holistic caring, complementary and alternative. Now that has a different model, which is that you care for one another. You facilitate people to heal themselves, release their own healing energy. You have a much less asymmetrical relationship. So there's care on a basis of selfless service and care on the basis of greater mutuality and an awareness that the carer needs to be cared for and appropriately rewarded and have higher status than we've given for a long time, ever. But for young people and Generation Z or Z, the mutuality is taken for granted, that view. I just wanted to share with you one finding, a little taster for a book that's in print at the moment called Gen Z Explained, The Art of Living in a Digital Age, which I have written with my co-researchers, Roberta Katz, Sarah Ogilvie, Jane Shaw. And for a couple of years, between 2017-19, we're doing the research in the UK and the USA with 18 to 25-year-olds. Because we were a multidisciplinary team, we could use surveys and interviews and focus groups and look at the social media content as well. And just the one thing I wanted to share from you from that is this finding from the nationally representative surveys. This is just Britain. America was not much different. And look, when you ask, which do you think should come first, caring for yourself or caring for others? 49%, a plurality of people say we should balance the two. Caring for others should come first, just 19%. Compare that with the Churches in Kendal response. Caring for myself should come first, 28%. So a balancing of the two is the most common sense of how things should be amongst younger people. Having said that, the sacrifices that care workers made, here are some of those who actually died, who gave their lives in the pandemic because they caught COVID in the course of caring. You know, that is the old Christian virtue of sacrifice. And we do still, you can't say that's not a part of an ethical life. We are profoundly grateful to them. In a funny way, I think the reason the NHS has become such a powerful symbol of what we value, a sacred symbol, is because it does sort of hold together the old Christian ethic and the new live your life ethic with the pride, you know, here with the pride, the diversity, the whole new set of ethics. And there's a difference, isn't there, between saying live your life ethic, what's its basis? Make the most of my life because it's better for me, or make the most of my life because it's better for everyone. The latter is obviously more socially profound. Just a quick mention, I'm about to end now, but I just wanted to mention that if you're looking at personal values and what our values are, it's really helpful to also think what anti-values they generate. But if you take this as a value, what looks evil from that point of view, or wicked? The Antichrist for us is the predator, the paedophile, the sexual abuser. And that's only recently become the case. I don't think you would have that sense without the live your life ethic having become dominant. We desecrate the grave of Jimmy Savile and paedophiles. So the anti-values today, in terms of wickedness, let me look at wickedness first: predation and abuse, because partly because we're aware of how mutually bound together we are. But more mildly, disrespect and unkindness we are increasingly intolerant of, many people are. And violating the duty of care. So health and safety becomes, a value, almost a sacred value, and minimizing risk. And in terms of what we think is tragic these days, we think it's tragic, inauthentic lives, wasted lives, lives aren't fully lived, lives cut short, and lives held back by fear, shame, lack of love, lack of support. So let me sum up. I started by talking about the new values visibility, and I hope I've given some explanation of why I think values have become so visible. It's because of the decoupling of values and religion. Values have gone off on their own, and in a way have become more important to us, a majority of people. That's all tied up with the growing numbers of people who say they have no religion, and with cultural and religious pluralism. And it's tied up with a shift from a society based on hierarchy and given roles to personal choice, responsibility, and identity being valued. So I have illustrated a flight from morality and moralism, a shift in our personal values, the resulting value pluralism and value sediments. I don't think we throw away the old sacrificial ethic. It's kind of sedimented in there somewhere, and it can be activated under certain conditions like COVID. So moral culture always has an excess. We don't use all of it. This also creates a moral majority. It used to be Christian, now it's non-religious, live your life. And that means there are moral minorities who don't agree, and who have conscientious objection to that ethic and what it implies. There are implications of this change for all sectors of society. I've just mentioned care, and anyone who wants to make social change has to appeal to it. But also this increased values visibility heightens the potential for conflict, and that's why I'm going to be looking at clashes in other lectures. Just want to re-emphasize this point with my sociological hat on. It was different in a more hierarchical society because people used to know their place, whereas now we have to find out who we are, each one of us. Final comment, what are values? Let me go back to that. I actually think they're abstractions. At their best, they're distillations of cultural wisdom at a particular time and place. But at their worst, they're slogans. They're fundamentalist, they can be used to bash other people with, and they're very static. So I would say we need to always ask of them, do they enhance or block the fluid and flowing field of ethical life as it's lived? And I hope you've enjoyed that little talk. I'm looking forward to the questions and discussion now. And just to remind you, the next 3 lectures are tomorrow, values in schools and organisations, then wider economic and political values, and then on Friday, value clashes and culture wars. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Linda. I'm stepping in to assist with the question and answer session. My name is Matt. I work here at the University of Birmingham. We've had many questions. as I think you can all see in the Q&A function. We'd encourage you to keep posting those. Some of you have been using the upvoting function, so you can vote for the things that you'd like to hear us post to Linda. We'll do our very best to get through everybody. We have 40 minutes and we'll see how we get on. So Linda, first question at the top of the list from Vincent Biondo. Vincent asks, when does the life your life... Oh, sorry. Vincent has now disappeared off my screen. Apologies. Here we go. When does the life your life ethic become self-worship, narcissism or consumerism? Is it individualistic by denying an obligation or interrelationship with nature, history and society?
Of course it can be. Of course it can be. I mean, I don't think there's any ethic at all that's immune, you know, it can't be ever inoculated against misuse and selfish use. The selfless ethic can be horribly passive aggressive also, you know. But does it have any particular vulnerabilities to those things? I mean, in terms of, you raise an interesting question there about relation to the rest of the planet. I mean, life is being emphasized as something that is common to everything, you know, to all living creatures. So it has that strong ecological potential that can or can't be mobilized, of course, but I think it's there. It did strike me when I was thinking about this that it does make a difference. There are those two ways you can take the live your life ethic, that live your life is good because it's good for me. Or you can think, well, actually it's good because it's good for everybody. You know, why the live your life ethic is good is that it's good for the whole of society. And that puts it on a different basis. So I think it partly depends, as all these things do, on the wider philosophy, framing, stories, you know, all the other things that go to make up a real ethical life, not just the, you know, the abstracted out values, which is what I've been talking about.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Next question from Canon Lindsay Dew. I didn't know that the Festival of Light was an outcome of MR. What other influences created this phenomenon, such as the post-war decline of faith?
Created that moral rearmament phenomenon, and that I think it was a sense that, you know, a Christian moral authority and guardianship that had been so taken for granted for so long was being questioned. By everything from rock and roll to, you know, gay liberation and what was being seen on people's televisions. Television was seen as itself very morally destructive by some Christians. So it was that sort of, it was that fear that, and it was all going to fall apart. The whole fabric of society would be ripped up if Christian values were not rapidly reinstated. That was the fear.
Okay, thanks, Linda.
And I've just said, I mean, that's heightened because of the World War, you know, and wanting to re-establish society on proper ethical foundations, of course.
We've had a question that's leapt to the top of the tree. How does the LYL attitude compare to culturally potent movements such as Black Lives Matter that prescribe values for everyone? For example, an actively anti-racist way of life. Are these contradictory or are they mutually supportive?
Great question. I think they're very mutually supportive. You know, I actually think they go hand in hand, because it's the sense that if lives are clearly not mattering in the way society is being structured, then they need that to be brought up to the same level, because those lives really, really matter. It is absolutely part of the live your life ethic, I think, that propels that.
Okay, that's great. A question from Clive Marsh. Linda, you said we might not simply choose our values, but might have to discover them. And the live your life approach is about living the life you're meant to live. What would the actual difference be between this and the theological notion of a person having a vocation?
Oh, that's a good question. Nothing in principle, but in practice, the difference is that we all have this vocation. So whereas the word vocation is usually reserved for a priestly or monastic calling, in the live your life ethic, everyone's got to discover their own vocation. Okay, I know that Lutherans will say that's what Luther thought, but it's not how people understand the word vocation. They think that's a religious calling. So I think it's a really great question, because you absolutely can see that it is just about sort of universalizing that sense that we've all got a vocation, which we don't just choose. You know, people talk about that in terms of finding their real gender or sexuality, or I didn't choose to be this way, I've just realized that's who I am. So I do emphasize this sense of discovery and not just choice.
Thanks, Linda. Next question. Do we know if people act on their values? Has this been measured? Or is it a narcissistic expression of how we would like ourselves to be perceived?
Do people act on their values? Oh, almost certainly not. I'm just trying to think read it again, Matt.
Yeah, sure. Do we know if people act on their values? Has this been measured? Or is it a narcissistic expression of how we would like ourselves to be perceived?
So that's any set of values, isn't it? So it's, you know, our value is just a way in which we try and ennoble ourselves, but actually we do really different things. Does it make any difference that we're clear what our values are to how we behave? It's a great question. I don't know that it has been measured. It would be a very taxing bit of research to do, but I'd love to know the answer. Thanks for suggesting it.
Question from Miss Ave Carter. Very fascinating view on values as the new religion. Thank you for the talk. My question is, what problems might there be if we formulate a normative ethic based on the worldview of live your life?
I think we are doing that right at the moment. And I think it means that we're having to rethink the basis of things, of our institutions and the way we behave. I think that's just what we're doing. And so, whereas before we used to just be a university, now we have to think, what are our values? And are we actually acting on these values? And if we say that we really value, let's say, care, you know, why aren't we paying anyone to do it anymore? And why have we sacked the counselling team, or whatever it might be? So I think we are all suddenly starting to think about this. Or let me give you another example. Somebody who works in healthcare and looks at values there told me that in the Netherlands that younger people coming into medical profession say, well, I need a self-care day today, or, you know, I just can't do this because I've got this other really important commitment, and I'm bringing my whole self to work, and the price is that you have to take account of that whole self. And so they're coming with a different set of values, and that upsets, you know, but you're meant to work 2 days without sleep. You know, it upsets the whole way that things have been done for a long time in a lot of institutions, as younger people particularly bring their values into other spheres. And I think that's it's an experiment that we're all living through at the moment to see. I just played out that experiment a little bit in thinking about care work and if it can still continue, but on a somewhat different basis. But we could ask that question of all spheres and sectors of society as well, I think.
Thanks, Linda. Jeremy Riddell from the SW London Humanists has said, you haven't mentioned beliefs. To what extent do you attribute this huge change to the erosion of the supernatural beliefs underpinning religious authority, which dates back at least to the 19th century, notably Darwin, and with roots in the Enlightenment?
Yes, well, it's beliefs that have been emphasized. Metaphysical beliefs in God or materialism or evolution or whatever, as so important and as really fundamental to the decline in religion. I was going to say religious belief, but my whole point is that's only half the story, and I'm trying to put that right by saying, just think about values. There's been a values revolution that's just as important in understanding how things have shifted and changed. Another really important point is that the beliefs haven't declined as much as the authority of religion. So we don't go to church as much or call ourselves Christian, but a lot of people still believe in God. And, you know, belief in God is separate from values. I mean, you can still believe in God and values can change, but the belief in God can go on. I mean, there are connections between them, but they're separate things that need to be looked at separately, I think. And you can have religion that doesn't do values.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Alison Fenton asks, while the values of live your life are decoupled from religion, do they become coupled with something else instead? And is this related to where power resides in our culture?
Ah, that's a great question. Yes. Do values become coupled to something else, if not religion? Well, there will always be people who are trying to become their spokespeople, just as religion wanted to be. So you'll get moral entrepreneurs who want to, you know, sell you the moral message. Will they become coupled up with myths and stories and, you know, like they are in religion, with powerful narratives and symbols? Yes. I mean, I think they already are, but it's often through popular narratives and cinema and, you know, and symbols like the rainbow, for example. So I think, yeah, it's a really interesting question, a good way of looking at it. There is this all sorts of interesting new couplings, if you like, going on.
Okay. Jonathan Abat asks, what do you think of Tom Holland's thesis in Dominion that modern secular ethics are in fact irredeemably Christian?
Yes and no. It's a good academic answer, isn't it? He's not specific enough because there isn't one Christian ethic. So there are lots of different strands of Christian ethics, very different from one another. And some of them are still incredibly influential, like the liberal, Protestant, progressive, universalist sort of global ethic. And I'll be talking more about that. I think that's still deeply influential, particularly on you know, progressive left, but secularized. They don't even see it as Christian. Other aspects of a Christian ethic we've completely left behind. So yeah, he needs to be more specific. I'm giving him a B+.
We'll feed that back to him. We have next question, who asks, where does the data on religious affiliation by age group come from? Are you able to share your source?
Oh, the source with me, that was a survey I did with YouGov in 2014. And if you Google Westminster Faith Debates and the research tab, all the data's there, the survey's there, and the data, so you can see it. And just drop me an email if you can't find it. But it's that my findings were they're the same. They're very much supported by the British Social Attitudes Survey, which is the authoritative survey that's regularly asked, finds the same level of non-religious affiliation.
Sandra Peters asks, what are your thoughts about the US-style emphasis on not wanting to grow up or age, and this LYL ethic, in that children cannot actually care for others but rely on others to care for them until they grow up and have that kind of agency?
Can you read it again, Matt?
What are your thoughts about the US-style emphasis on not wanting to grow up or age, and this live your life ethic, in that children cannot actually care for others but rely on others to care for them until they grow up and have that kind of agency?
Does that suggest that there's sort of perpetual infantilizing?
I think so.
I'd need to have a conversation about that, because I need to know where's the evidence of that. I mean, a few people want to never die, I know, but that's cryogenic kind of. I'd have to talk more about what you mean by that. Sorry.
Sure, thank you. Christina poses the question, thank you for the talk, really interesting. Have you noticed a link to death and afterlife beliefs at all?
Death and afterlife. I mean, off the top of my head, my thought would be that well, Tony Walter, who's a wonderful sociologist of death and dying, he has documented a shift from kind of Christian practices around death. I mean, the traditional Christian funeral service in this country didn't mention the person other than the name. It's a short liturgy, and it's the same for everybody. So he documents how we move from that to addresses that are all about the person, rather than the afterlife and resurrection. They're about the person's life. So they are life focused, and you have an address that talks about the life and how that life was lived. So I suppose you could certainly say that reflects that sort of a shift. As for afterlife, Tony Walter again has looked at what he calls popular theology. New popular theology is like the idea that people live on as angels. Belief in an afterlife has been growing, I should start by saying, in this country, and it's very high, and it doesn't track secularization. So we do have a sense that human life, and increasingly animal life, or pet life anyway, goes on, and we're starting to think about it in new ways, which is not something that Christianity did, because Christianity thought that between your death and the resurrection, there isn't something. So you shouldn't pray to the dead in Protestant Christianity or the Church of England. And that left a gap in thinking, well, where is this life now? And we're filling that increasingly, Walter argues, with new images and ways of thinking about life. Or if you go to, I love walking around cemeteries and funerals, and graveyards. There are benches now, and there are windmills, and they catch the spirit, or dream catchers. They're catching the spirits of people. So there are all these new beliefs about that. I think absolutely you could make a connection there.
Great. Thanks, Linda. Jared Laughlin asks, how does the live your life ethic relate to the fact that Boris Johnson, whose only interest in the NHS is its privatisation for the benefit of his friends, so that's Jared's opinion, I'm sure that's shared by many people here, is still popular? What values lead people to vote for a man working against the common good, against their good? And perhaps this is a question for a later lecture, Jared also adds, because I appreciate your
yes, it might be.
future theme. That could be
I think I would take issue with you that Boris Johnson's whatever you think of him, is a very astute politician, and he knows that the NHS is sacred. And save our NHS, that was the absolute #1 slogan. Protect the NHS throughout the pandemic. He knows that the NHS is something sacred. He hasn't attacked the NHS. He's if you look at his speeches, he's done nothing but praise it. Now, you might argue that in practice he hasn't invested enough, or nurses haven't been given a proper pay rise, but his rhetoric has certainly been absolutely in tune with people's care for the NHS.
Sarah Rowland Jones asks, in LYL ethic, do we discover ourself or choose ourself, even create our own brand?
We do all those things, don't we? We do all those things. We have to discern who we really are, and that can take a lifetime, decades. And then we have to we have to live authentically and get things in. We have to be real and honest about who we are, and we have to arrange our life around who that is. So that's a moral enterprise in the live your life ethic that's to be admired when people really do that. Was there another part of that question I've missed, Matt?
I don't think so. Let me just have a quick check. No, I think you've covered that, Linda.
Okay.
Just scrolling down. JD asks, guilt plays a role in some religions. How does this influence values for LYL?
Guilt. Gosh, these are good questions. Guilt is a really anti-value, I think, for LYL. It's something to, well, no, the real anti-value is shame. So if you understand guilt as what you feel when you've done a wrong act, well, sometimes guilt is very healthy. You have done something wrong and you need to feel guilty. That's okay, even on a live your life ethic. But shame is just an overwhelming sense of your own unworthiness, which is a horrible thing to feel, because you can't live your life if you're feeling that. It inhibits you. So it's one of the real anti-values, and it's really crucial if you're going to live your life, to get rid of that shame, which has been put there on you by someone or something else or society.
Thanks, Linda. Phil Groves, a question from Phil. Can we counter the existential threat of the climate crisis with a live your life ethic? Or do we need a sacrifice ethic for the future generation? Is Greta Thunberg expressing live your life or an others first ethic?
Well, the short answer is, when you're dealing with some huge global thing like climate change, any cause like that, if you're going to win people to your cause, especially when it's not immediately directly affecting them, you have to appeal to what are values for them. So responding effectively to climate change is only ever going to work by appealing to the many different sets of values that people around the world have. And I think that, you know, these great blanket blueprint, here's what's wrong, here's what the science says, here's what we've all got to do, that's never going to work. It just creates a counter reaction because it's not sensitive enough to the specificity of what people think is important to them. That's my general answer. There was a very interesting specific question in there about whether a sacrificial, you know, self-sacrifice is somehow going to be more conducive to taking the threat seriously and acting appropriately than live your life. No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that, you know, it can appeal to both, but it has to appeal on different grounds, and different people will find it compelling for different reasons and act differently. So, you know, in that sense, I'm a value pluralist, and I think a lot of campaigns don't take seriously people's values in their plurality.
Thank you,
and Greta Thunberg, I don't know which she is. I haven't studied her enough.
Okay, just looking, the questions are bouncing up and down here. Sarah Jane Page asks, or says, fascinating talk. To what extent does opposition to religion explicitly manifest itself in the LY ethic? For example, the idea that religion is anti-queer has supported CSA, has oppressed women. How explicit is this in the LYL ethic?
I think that's a kind of, you know, it's a sort of trope. I mean, religion is this really handy symbol of everything that's toxic and against the LYL ethic, to be wheeled out occasionally. That's why I said we're ambivalent about religion. You know, in certain settings, you can play that record, and people understand it and think, oh yes, that's dreadful, and we're all rebelling against that. And then in a different setting, you can ask people about religion, and they'll have a very different response to it. I mean, take faith schools in Britain. They're very symptomatic of that, because a third of our schools are still mainly Christian schools, and parents still want to send their kids there, and they partly want to send their kids there because they like the idea of the values and ethos, but a lot of them are very secular and very secular liberals as well. So we do have this kind of, depending on which day of the week and which circumstances, you can have that toxic brand view of religion, or actually it'd be really great to get my kid into that school view of it. So I think we do have this incredibly complex relationship with our with a majority Christian past.
Julian Selman asks, to what degree can the promotion of certain values become virtue signalling in different contexts? For example, schools, companies, as they want to be perceived as being part of the zeitgeist. Maybe this can apply to religion as well.
Yes, I mean, virtue signalling is a great concept that's grown up quite recently, hasn't it? I think as we've become, along with values visibility, and people become aware that you can kind of values wash everything and say these are our wonderful values and behave very differently. It's a fantastically important question that's going to run through all my lectures, and I'm actually going to address it really head on in the lecture tomorrow, where I'm looking at corporate values and school values, and I'm going to suggest some ways in which you might be able to test out whether these are just values washing or whether there's something more serious going on here.
Okay, thank you. Canon Lindsay Dew asks, what happens when someone's lived their life clashes with someone else's lived their life? Does that lead to a growth of intolerance?
It can do. It can do, because it feels like a moral imperative to both of you in that situation. There are ways in which it needn't, which I think have to do with taking the time and the trouble to realize what the other person's values are, and probably finding some point of value. You can usually find some point of value convergence if you go down deep enough talking to somebody whose values appear the opposite of yours, but when you talk about why it is, you'll find, oh, actually that's because they value the family. And why do they value the family? Oh, because, you know, this happened to them and that happened to them. And then at some point you probably will find some value convergence, but that takes time and effort and care to get to that. And it is much easier to just think, well, you're just not just, you know, because it's not just you're wrong, it's you're evil, isn't it? It's its worst. And you're undermining everything that I stand for and believe in, and all the good in me.
Thanks, Linda. Next question we have here is, do you agree with the thesis of, for example, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of morality, that this culture climate change has resulted in poorer individual health, family breakdown, and a drop in social cohesion? Or is this a moral rearmament argument that has been lost?
I think it is a kind of moral rearmament argument, that. I mean, I would see Rabbi Sachs as in a more sort of communitarian school of thinking, which a lot of, you know, someone like Rowan Williams probably belongs to, or a lot of the Abrahamic, well, maybe not, Jewish and Christian leaders belong to, and think that you should start with community and you start with society. Well, then you have to sacrifice yourself to that higher good. And that is in tension or clash with the live your life ethic, which starts with your life and builds community on the basis of us each being able to be who we really are together. So they do come at it from very different standpoints. And that's why the people who are most critical of the live your life ethic and most accuse it of being narcissistic tend to be communitarians who start with saying that it's the society, it's the church, it's the, you know, religious community that's the good, not the individual within it. They are very different ways of thinking. They just are.
A question here from Chris Steed. He says, evening, Linda. He met you at Sockrell. You wrote a very favourable comment on his book, Voice, Choice and the Death of Distance. Chris's question is, how much do you think the value of people, value and worth of the human, has come to the fore as defining the values debate and is really its essence?
I think it might be helpful to make a distinction between a humanistic ethic of the kind that uses the concept of the human as, you know, something common that we all share, whereas the LYL ethic is much more about the individual. It's much more about the unique individual, rather than starting with a common humanity. So it might at first sight seem to be very humanistic, but I think it takes a different step, actually.
Super. Ian Black asks, if live your life is personally decided, what will appeal, or is there a common thread that means it's not as individualistic as it sounds? But are there social trends working like a hidden hand?
That's a beautiful way of putting it. I hope there are. That's what Hugh Rock argues. You know, he's optimistic about it. And he thinks that the hidden hand is that if you really think that, if I think that that what's good is for me to be allowed to choose and live out my best Linda, then I have to extend that to you, Matt. You know, you've got to be the best Matt you can be. And I will spend time and effort in trying to help that happen, especially if you're my friend. So Hugh Rock thinks that friendship is the new, you know, it takes the place of agape, and that's the sort of hidden hand that's implicit in it. However, one slightly different take on the same thing, a book I haven't mentioned is a book by Maffesoli called The Time of the Tribes, which is a book I like a lot by a French philosopher. And it's a wonderful title, The Time of the Tribes. And he sort of is onto a live your life ethic, but he thinks it means that we just band together in very small groups, and that those groups start to all compete with one another, because you bind together with people whose lives are like your life. So two different two different answers to that one question by different thinkers about it.
Linda. Miss Ave Carter asks, to what extent is the live your life ethic a religious ethic?
I don't think, I mean, if you depends how you define religion, and we all know there are 101 ways to define religion. But if you define, I'm going to define religion, I like to define religion in terms of belief in spirits, gods, you know, higher powers and evil powers, beyond the everyday. If you define religion like that, it's not a religious ethic. It doesn't depend at all on believing any of that. It's perfectly compatible with believing those things, but you don't have to. So on that definition, I'd say no, it's not a religious ethic.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Hannah Mather asks, could you offer any thoughts on the compatibility of the gifts of the Spirit, 1 Corinthians 12, I think that refers to, within the LYL ethic?
Oh, I think maybe the thought there is that the gifts of the Spirit are given individually to different, you know, people have different gifts, don't they? So they're not there. There's a sort of uniqueness to the gift that is given you. Well, there's only a limited list of gifts there, but if you want to multiply that by 6 billion, then it could be a very compatible thought, and the sort of Pauline idea that we're all needed to make up the one body. Yes, I suppose you could take that in that direction. That's a really interesting thought.
Thanks, Linda. Jane Tillier asks, I'd be interested in your thoughts on the contribution of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy discourses to the LYL values.
That's a very interesting topic. I mean, I immediately think there must be some quite important influence of psychoanalysis and therapy on the live your life ethic, because it is about discovering who you are, and freeing you to be who that is. So I think yes, and I think probably you can see that. I'm thinking about the literature in pastoral theology, where there was in the late 80s and 90s, there was a big debates about the faith of the therapists, and whether that was compatible with Christian pastoral counselling. Jane, who's asked the question, will know all about that. And there was a real clash, and I think they are incompatible. You know, the pastor who was giving you spiritual advice wasn't the therapist. The therapist was doing something very different, and the authority wasn't in God and the church. It was in the counselling relationship, and ultimately in the client. So I think, yes, I think that Jane's onto something there, that they are got important roots, live your life ethic and therapy, common roots.
Next question from Stephen Fox. Has the LYL generation totally lost a sense of the mysterious? Have they lost a feeling of awe?
I'd love to ask why he thinks that might be. And I mean, even if the answer is yes, and I don't know what the answer is, even if the answer is yes, I don't think it's because of the live your life ethic. I mean, the answer might be that it might be something very different. It might be to do with the lack of connection with religion, organised religion, or something, or, you know, busyness, or how we live our lives in practice, the internet. But I, you know, even the answer, it's a very interesting question. The answer might be yes. I don't think the reason why is that the live your life ethic has caused that. I think it's perfectly possible to have a sense of awe and live by the live your life ethic.
Thanks, Linda. I'm just keeping an eye on the time because I know Charlotte wants to come in at the end. So maybe time for one or two more questions. I'll try and apologies to everybody we've not been able to get to. There's so many questions there. We'd be here for the rest of the evening, I think. Okay, so we have Gerard Laughlin asks, given that our lives are always dependent on the lives of others, supporting and enabling, and influencing in ways we rarely notice, and subject to context and circumstance. So our freedoms are hugely compromised. Is the LYL ethic dependent on a blindness to our dependencies? We don't choose the lives we live.
No, I don't think it is. I think it actually really is incredibly deeply aware of the dependencies. And actually, strangely, I think that the agape ethic was much more sort of autonomously focused. And that's partly why we didn't see abuse as so bad. We didn't think it really hurt people that much because we weren't aware of just how closely connected we are. People, I mean, Charles Taylor's good on this. If what matters is the ethic of authenticity and being who you really are, you have to be recognized for who you are by someone else. And then people develop a sense of just how awful shame is, just how terrible it is not to have who you are recognized, not to be able to speak who you are. All those things are awful. That's why something like Black Lives Matter again is such an important movement, or Me Too. It's or listening to children. So all those things, I think we've developed a stronger sense of how entangled we are. But what I do think that Gerald's onto something, though. I think that what the Live Your Life ethic gives up or loses is a sense of sort of lifelong commitment, whatever, because you commit yourself to someone or something or an institution so long as it's the right thing for you. I mean, that's different to committing for till death do us part, in sickness and in health, which is not something that the Live Your Life ethic is very good at sustaining.
Thank you, Linda. I think at that point, I will hand back to Charlotte because we have 2 or 3 minutes left. But thank you to all your questions.
Thank you so much for this rich and insightful intellectual feast you've presented us with, and how engagingly and effortlessly you've done that, speaking freely. Thank you also to our fantastic audience and to your, Linda's, engagement so generously with all these amazing questions. I noticed Jared got in a couple of times, so well done to you, Jared. And I know that Linda said, as we spoke earlier, she's keen to have the chat downloaded, which this technology does allow us. So she can actually read all of your questions. And I'm sure that many of you, like myself, are looking forward to tomorrow's and the other 2 final lectures of this week. You've really made a fantastic start to this series and really stimulated all of us. Thank you very much, Linda and everyone, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.